Hello, scholars. Mr. Shaw here, and anyone else who might be happening upon this video. Today, we're going to be learning about an artist whose name is Alberto Giacometti. Now, Alberto Giacometti was a sculptor who was born in 1901. It's 119 years ago, and he lived in a country called Switzerland. Now, he went to school to become a sculptor and ended up becoming one of the most well-known and one of the most famous and influential figure sculptures in the 20th century. Now, as we get into looking at his artwork, there are going to be some words that I'll be using a lot. One of them is figure, and a figure is the shape of a person. And this is a good word to use for Alberto Giacometti because his figure sculptures, while they do make us think of people and they do look like people, they don't look exactly like people all of the time. And they especially don't look like specific people, even though he may have been thinking of or may have been trying to make specific people while he made these sculptures. For the most part, they're going to look kind of generic. They're going to look like they could be anybody. And that's part of what makes them so recognizable and so different than a lot of other sculptures we'll look at. Some other words I'm going to be using are the words texture, which talks about how something feels. The texture of something can be very rough, it could be smooth, it could be furry or slimy. Alberto Giacometti's sculptures tend to be kind of rough, and that's going to be one of the things that we're going to try to replicate or copy when we make our sculptures at the end of this lesson. So let's take a look at some of Alberto's artwork and see what makes him so special. So here on the screen now are some of Alberto Giacometti's figure sculptures. You'll see one of them is actually of an animal. It looks like a cat. And one of the things I find really interesting about his sculptures is the fact that these figures are so long and tall and narrow. And you can see that they don't have the same kind of body proportions. That means how everything compares to each other on the shape of a real person. These legs are extra long, they're kind of skinny, much skinnier than a normal person's arm or leg would be. Even their body shape, that torso that goes from the shoulders down to the hips, is far skinnier than a normal person or an average person would be. If this was a real person, proportionally, they might be 12 or 14 feet tall. Now, most of Alberto Giacometti's sculptures are actually made of metal. Now, he does form them out of clay first, and that's what gives them that rough, bumpy texture. If we look over at this sculpture here on the right, we can see that the shoulders and the face and the body of this person, this figure being represented here, is kind of chunky and bumpy and really, really rough. And that's the same with all of these figures. This guy over here, even though we can see like little, oops, not sure where that didn't magnify. Let's take a second. We'll look at this cat real quick. See if we can get that to blow up for us. Here we go. And you can see that rough texture of the metal that was used to make these sculptures. Now, even though there are some details of the face, maybe some ear or a little bit of a nose and a mouth and eyes, even kind of a hair texture, there aren't a lot of very specific details, not a lot of really recognizable features of any of these figures. Now, most of these are kind of tabletop sculptures, I would consider them. Some of these figures might only be about a foot tall, and in fact, when Giacometti began his sculpture work, his sculptures were very, very tiny, only a couple of inches tall. But as he continued to grow fame and as he continued to have more prominence in the art world, that means more people kind of knew what his work was, and also some experiences that he had during World War II, he began to make those sculptures larger and larger and larger. Now, what we're going to be doing today in our art lesson, or I'm sorry, this week, is we're going to be making figure sculptures in the same style of Giacometti. We're actually going to be using metal ourselves. Metal you're going to have probably just lying around your house to make these long, tall, skinny-armed and skinny-legged figures with that crinkly, kind of bumpy texture. So now that we've learned a little bit about what makes Alberto Giacometti's artwork so unique and so different and so memorable and recognizable, that means you kind of know it's his anytime you see his work. If you need to, go ahead and pause the video. because now it's going to be our turn to make our own sculptures. All you're going to need is some aluminum foil. You might have some of that in your kitchen. Make sure you ask your mom or dad before you grab some. You don't need a big piece, just a small square of that will do. And I want you to look around your house and see if you have any old cereal boxes. Any kind of thin cardboard like that. A cereal box, a tissue box would work. Maybe a box that held some frozen food that was in your freezer. Again, if you need some help with that, make sure to ask a grown-up in your house. Please don't use the cardboard from a box of cereal you're still eating, but you might be able to look around and find something you could use. Stay tuned and we'll take a look at what that sculpture looks like when we build it ourselves. All right, scholars, I'm really excited about today's activity because we are actually going to be making a sculpture just like the artist Alberto Giacometti. Here's what you'll need for today's lesson. You'll need just a small piece of aluminum foil from your kitchen. Now, make sure you ask your family before you use up that foil. We shouldn't be going to the store too often. I don't want you guys to use up supplies that you need at home, but I figured pretty much everyone has foil and you don't need a big piece for this to happen. Another thing that will make this project a little bit easier for you is just a piece of cardboard. Now, I don't expect everyone to have lots of spare cardboard lying around the house, but you can use any kind of cardboard. I like to use the thin cardboard from cereal boxes. If you have boxes of granola bars or fruit snacks or any other kind of light, thin cardboard, even a box of tissues would work for this. Now, these are the only things you absolutely need today. It would be helpful too to have a pencil, and if you have a pair of scissors or tape, that might make your job a little bit easier later, but you don't have to have these. So I'm not actually going to be using these today, but I will mention the times when they might make your job a little easier. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be making a figure sculpture. That means we're going to make a sculpture in the shape of a person. Just like Alberto Giacometti, he had those long, tall, very skinny, very kind of crinkly looking figures that were made of metal. So we're actually using some crinkly metal ourselves, and there are some things we can do to make this look exactly like the shape of a person. So go ahead and grab a pencil, grab some foil, and a small piece of cardboard, and let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw 5 lines on my aluminum foil. Now you could use a pencil for this, or if you have a crayon. If you don't have anything to write with, you could actually just use your fingernail and kind of scratch those marks into your foil. And that should leave a little dent behind because the foil is kind of soft metal and you can really kind of mark into it. So I'm going to draw a line down the middle here. Actually, I'm going to use a marker so it's a little easier for you guys to see. I'm going to draw a line down the middle at the bottom. I don't want it to go too far up. I'm not even going to go halfway up, a little less than halfway from the bottom of my foil here. And then I'm going to draw 2 lines on the side. Now, for my scholars who are studying fractions at all, you want to break up these sides into about thirds. So you want 1, 2, 3 pieces almost equal in size, as close as you can get them. My bottom piece looks a little long, but I'm okay with that. Now I don't want those, again, to go all the way to the middle. I want to leave some space here. And then I'm going to draw 2 more lines on this side for a total of 5 lines. And these lines are going to be directly across from, almost like a mirror image of the ones across from them. A reflection for those of you who are studying geometry. So once I have those lines in, I actually want to cut them or rip them. Now, if you have a pair of scissors, this is a time when you might want to use those scissors and snip those lines. If you don't have scissors, just very slowly and very carefully rip the length of all 5 of those lines. So there's my first one. I just ripped my foil down here at the bottom. And then I'm going to rip these lines on the sides. The line doesn't have to be perfectly straight. What you do want to be careful of is not to rip that piece off. You want to leave this place unripped to keep these little sections together into one piece of foil. So I'm going to rip that a little bit right here. And then on the other side, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to rip, and I'm going to rip. Now, if you've ripped those lines, you should have 2 two little folding sections at the top, two folding sections in the middle, and two little diagonal squares down here at the bottom. Now here's when it gets really fun. Those top sections, you're going to kind of fold them in on each other, and then very carefully crinkle them into a ball. Now I'm doing this with just the tips of my fingers. I don't want to put it in my fist and crunch it because I don't want that to fall away from everything else. And I'm not going to crunch it up all the way, but I want to get it into kind of a ball shape, a sphere or a circle, all the way at the top. And that's going to be my figure's head. These two flaps are going to be the arms of my figure. So I'm going to start to crinkle those. I'm going to keep those bottom two squares flat. And I'm going to crinkle those two squares that were here in the middle into nice, long, skinny pieces, kind of like arms. And you can squish those pretty flat. And then I'll do the same with these two bottom ones. I'm going to very carefully just kind of crunch that foil together, trying not to rip it, into nice, long leg shapes. And already, my foil's starting to look like the shape of a person. Now, if you're like me and you're a little bit of a perfectionist, you might want to scrunch those pieces together. I highly recommend trying to get the legs the same length if you need to. If you have one longer leg, just kind of fold that foot up a little bit. And now I have a little piece of foil that looks just like the shape of a person. It's got a head, some arms, a body, and two little legs. So this is a pretty cool sculpture so far. You could put it in different poses. Maybe it's flexing its muscles. Maybe it's doing a karate kick. But one thing that I like to do, especially if I want to look at this sculpture or maybe even use it as a drawing tool, is I want to give it a base. I want to give it something to stand up straight on. Now, while we were learning about Giacometti, we saw that all of his sculptures had those square or rectangle shaped blocks of metal to hold them in place. So I can do the same thing with my little cereal box top here. What I can do is I can kind of set my person on there and figure out how much of that cardboard I need. I don't think I need this whole piece, so I can snip the end off this. Again, if you don't have scissors, you could always rip that edge. I'm going to straighten up my edges here a little bit, since I do have a pair of scissors. Again, you could do most of this work or all of this work just by ripping the cardboard. Now, what I'm going to do after that is I'm going to hold my figure out, and I'm going to find about how wide I want those legs to be. And if you want to, you can kind of mark the spot where you want those feet to be with a pencil or a marker or a crayon or whatever you have. And then I'm going to rip a line from the edge of my cardboard down to that circle where I want the foot to be. I'm just going to give it a little tear, just like that. Then I'm going to do the same with this other dot. I'm going to rip from that dot to the edge of my cardboard, just like that. Now, that seems like kind of a strange thing, and this isn't a step you would have to do if you had tape. Now, if you have some tape, you could actually flatten a little piece of your person's foot onto the cardboard and stick a piece of tape right there, and they'll be able to stand up pretty much on their own. If you don't have tape, this is a really good technique. Just tear lines about halfway through the cardboard, and then actually slide your person's foot through the cardboard a little bit so that it's peeking out on the other side, and then kind of bend it back, like fold it around the edge of that cardboard, almost so the foot is holding onto the cardboard on the other side. And I can kind of readjust that cardboard. Now you can see my person's pretty well stuck on there just by using a piece of foil folded around the back. I can do the same with the other foot. I'm just going to flatten out a little piece. If you need to, you can kind of pull a little piece out, and I'm going to slide that in between that tear. I'll kind of get those back into position. You can see the little feet sticking out on the other side. And now I have a little sculpture of a person that can stand up on their own. And you can put them in whatever kind of pose that you want. Maybe they're dabbing, which was very popular for a very, very long time. Maybe Again, they could be flexing their muscles. If you want one of their feet to be up, you could always detach that, have a foot up in the air. And this is a really good drawing tool for those of you who struggle with drawing the shapes of a person. You can set up your little model now and put them in any kind of pose or any kind of position you want to figure out, where would my arms go if my hands were on my hips? Or if I was scratching my head and I was confused, what might that look like? And you can set up your sculpture anywhere you want, and it's a freestanding sculpture that you've made out of metal, just like the artist Alberto Giacometti. So if you've made your own little sculpture, put it into a fun pose. Take a picture of it for me, send it to me on Class Dojo if you're a Henry Johnson Scholar. If you're making this at home, if you're not one of my students, I hope you enjoyed this. Everyone stay safe out there. Make as many of these foil sculptures as you have aluminum foil. Remember, make sure you ask your parents first. And everyone have a great week. Stay safe, wash your hands, and I'll see you next time.